Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When drought scorched the land and water became currency, one man's self-reliance turned him into public enemy number one. But when the HOA queen tried to drain his private pool and his pride, she had no idea he controlled the very water her kingdom depended on. Let the suburban war begin. Tucked away on the dry northern edge of a California suburb, Justin Coleman's home stood like a quiet fortress of logic and preparation. Elevated above the gridded streets below, his property was more than a house. It was a statement. A former hydrologist in his early 40s, Justin had poured his expertise into designing a self-sustaining homestead. Solar panels shimmered on the roof. A state-of-the-art filtration system hummed discreetly in the garage. And his proudest achievement, a deep, licensed groundwater well provided a steady, independent flow of water. In a time when local lawns had turned to brittle straw and the city enforced strict water rations, Justin's pool sparkled defiantly in the sun. That morning, the air was thick with heat. Justin stood barefoot by the edge of the pool, sipping iced coffee as the final inches filled in. It had taken weeks of careful calibration, energy-efficient pumping, and legal paperwork. Every drop had been accounted for, filtered, and earned. He was proud, not of the luxury, but of the balance, of knowing he had beat the system without cheating it. Then came the voice, sharp, commanding, offended. "Excuse me, are you filling that pool during a stage 4 drought?" Justin turned, marching up the gravel path, clipboard in hand, and wearing a pastel blouse stiff with self-importance, was a woman he recognized from the HOA bulletin someone had once shoved in his mailbox. Karen Strauss, president of Hawthorne Heights Homeowners Association. The woman whose emails were formatted like legal briefs and whose tone suggested she considered herself a mix of public servant and sheriff. Without waiting for an invitation, she launched into a breathless tirade about water restrictions, shared responsibility, and the moral failure of indulgence in a time of crisis. She concluded by stating, as if it were obvious, that Justin needed to 1. Cease filling the pool immediately, 2. Agree to share his well water with the neighborhood through an emergency conservation coalition, and 3. Sign voluntary annexation papers to bring his property under HOA governance for the greater good. Justin stared at her, more amused than angry, but already weary. "This isn't your jurisdiction," he said calmly. "My well is permitted, my usage is legal, and my property is not, nor has it ever been part of your HOA. Karen's face twitched. "You can't seriously expect the rest of us to sit in drought while you host backyard pool parties like some kind of desert oligarch." He chuckled softly. "No parties, just peace. Something you might enjoy if you left my property." Her jaw locked. She pivoted on her heel, muttering something about selfishness and regulatory action. As she disappeared down the slope, Justin exhaled slowly. He didn't yet know how far Karen would go, but something in her eyes, tight with righteousness and denial, told him this wasn't the last time he'd see her climbing that hill. The dust hadn't even settled from Karen's departure before the first wave of passive-aggressive retaliation began. Within days, Justin noticed crisp HOA-branded flyers appearing in neighborhood mailboxes, and not just in Hawthorne Heights. They'd somehow made their way into the mail slots of homes adjacent to Justin's property, even ones clearly outside HOA boundaries. The message was clear. Local resident refuses to cooperate with community drought conservation efforts. Water hoarding during emergency conditions is unethical. His name wasn't printed, but a satellite image of his property, complete with a very visible pool, was splashed across the bottom. Soon, Karen's crusade morphed into a full-fledged campaign. A Facebook group appeared, titled Water Justice for Hawthorne, where members, mostly a small but loud cohort of HOA loyalists, shared blurry photos of Justin's property, speculated on how much water his pool consumed, and theorized about the legality of that well. The group's tagline: "One man can't be allowed to drown a community in selfishness." Karen moderated every post with the fervor of someone convinced she was saving civilization, one hashtag at a time. Justin, far from shocked, responded with quiet efficiency. He filed a cease and desist letter through his attorney, which was, of course, ignored. He installed a new layer of security, motion-triggered cameras at each entry point of his land, one perched discreetly in the old oak tree at the front gate, and another mounted beneath the eaves of his workshop, giving a full view of the pool area. He wasn't paranoid, he was prepared. Still, the HOA's tactics grew more theatrical. One morning, he woke up to find a small group of residents walking slowly past his driveway in a so-called awareness march, all wearing matching blue t-shirts with water droplet icons and holding signs reading, "Water is a right, not a luxury," and "Equality over evaporation." A local teenager live-streamed the entire procession with the caption, "Exposing our neighborhood's biggest water waster." Justin watched from his porch, sipping coffee, wearing a bathrobe and aviators. He raised his mug to the camera in a silent toast. Though the provocations were ridiculous, he couldn't dismiss them outright. Karen was building narrative momentum, crafting a perception of Justin as a rogue citizen who threatened the collective good. She didn't just want water, she wanted submission. But Justin wasn't the kind of man to bow to mob pressure, especially not one led by someone whose entire authority rested on an overinflated interpretation of neighborhood bylaws. He knew the rules, the land, and the law, and most of all, he knew how to fight back. By the third week, Karen's tactics shifted from suggestive slander to outright manipulation. The gloves were off. Having failed to shame Justin into compliance publicly, she turned to paperwork, a realm where most people faltered, but where Justin, to her misfortune, excelled. She submitted a revised neighborhood boundary adjustment proposal to the county clerk's office, attempting to have Justin's parcel retroactively included in the HOA's governance. The document was riddled with amateur legal phrasing and built on shaky historical references, but it looked official enough to warrant preliminary review. For most people, that alone would have been terrifying. For Justin, it was laughable. Until it wasn't. He received a notice from the county stating that a petition had been filed claiming his property should be considered part of the community under a missed annexation clause. Justin blinked at the paper, then exhaled sharply. This wasn't just noise anymore. Karen had crossed into bureaucratic warfare, but she wasn't done. That weekend, without warning or permission, a landscaping crew appeared at the edge of his property. They started measuring the fence line, marking the ground with orange spray paint. When Justin confronted them, the foreman, apologetic but confused, explained that they were hired by the HOA president to bring this yard up to neighborhood code. Justin didn't yell. He simply walked into his workshop, retrieved a bound copy of his property deed, and pointed at the line where it clearly stated, "Not under jurisdiction of any homeowners association." Then he called the sheriff. No charges were filed that day, but the incident was documented, and it gave Justin exactly what he needed, proof of unlawful encroachment. Meanwhile, Karen doubled down on her fantasy version of reality. She held an emergency HOA meeting, where she presented a color-coded map she had altered to include Justin's land, claiming it was a cartographic oversight. Residents, confused and increasingly uncomfortable, watched as she accused Justin of hoarding a community resource and violating the spirit of conservation. Her arguments were passionate, dramatic, even convincing to the uninformed, but they were based on fiction. Justin responded by launching a public info page, justinswaterfacts.com, where he uploaded actual documentation, his water rights license, the geology reports on his well, and time-stamped footage of the landscaping intrusion. He didn't editorialize. He didn't name-call. He simply posted the truth. And slowly, the cracks in Karen's narrative began to show. But even as more residents began to question her, Karen grew more desperate, more bold. It was clear to Justin she wasn't going to stop until she made her move. The question wasn't if she'd cross another line. The question was how far she'd go. It was a blistering Thursday morning, the kind where the air shimmered just above the ground and everything felt on edge, as if the land itself were holding its breath. Justin had left early to attend a regional water board seminar, ironic in retrospect, and was gone for only a few hours. Before he left, he'd checked his cameras, confirmed everything was secure, and locked the gate behind him, as always. The pool glimmered in the sun, a calm sapphire rectangle in his backyard. It wasn't just water to him, it was effort, strategy, self-reliance, peace. When he returned, it was gone. He turned into the driveway and instantly felt something was off. The air was heavier, too quiet, As he crested the hill and the backyard came into view, his heart dropped. The pool, his meticulously managed, regulation-compliant pool, was empty, bone dry. Sunlight bounced harshly off the bottom, which was streaked with mud and the ghostly outlines of where water once shimmered. A plastic float lay toppled on the concrete like the last survivor of a massacre. For a moment, Justin just stood there, hands on his hips, breath frozen in his chest. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stared. Then the realization hit him like a thunderclap. He rushed inside, pulled up the security feed, and rewound the footage. His stomach clenched with each frame. There they were, Karen, in cargo shorts and a bright orange HOA cap, accompanied by two unfamiliar men in work gear. She'd climbed the gate, climbed-eyed like some suburban vigilante, and opened it from the inside. The men carried hoses and a portable pump system. One attached a hose directly into the pool's drain access port, while the other unspooled a line into a storm drain just beyond the property line. Karen, ever the overseer, paced the concrete edge with arms folded, nodding approvingly as the water was drained, gallon by gallon, into the street. But it was what she said to the camera that turned Justin's blood to ice. Sometimes the people have to act when the system won't. If the law won't stop selfishness, we will. He watched himself go still on screen. Then he hit pause. Silence. Then laughter. Bitter. Sharp. It wasn't the pool. Not really. It was everything. The blatant disregard. The entitlement. The invasion. Karen had taken what she thought he valued most, not to claim it, but to destroy it, to prove a point. She didn't just cross the line. She paved over it and declared herself mayor. Justin stood from his desk, fists clenched. He paced once, twice, then stopped. Something inside him settled, not with calm, but with cold, methodical precision. This wasn't a neighborhood feud anymore. It was war. He called his attorney, not the local property lawyer he'd previously consulted. No, this time he called Sandra Valdez, a seasoned litigator with a history of chewing HOAs into legal mulch. When her assistant answered, Justin didn't waste a second. "Hi. My name is Justin Coleman. I need to file a lawsuit for trespassing, property destruction, and unlawful utility interference. And I have video." After hanging up, he walked back outside. The empty pool yawned up at him like a hollow ribcage. The sun was still blazing, the wind still dry, and the world still turning. But something had shifted. The line had been drawn, etched in legal ink and raw emotion. He wouldn't just defend himself anymore. He would burn their paper fortress down with facts, footage, and fireproof litigation. And this time, Karen wouldn't be draining water. She'd be draining funds, reputation, and power. The courtroom buzzed with a barely restrained anticipation that bordered on theatrical. Reporters lined the back wall, scribbling notes and whispering to their colleagues, while HOA members filled the benches in tense silence. Some looked determined, others embarrassed, but all were drawn by the magnetic pull of drama they could no longer ignore. At the center of it all sat Karen Strauss, stiff-backed, jaw clenched, her once confident posture fraying at the edges. Her signature orange HOA badge had been replaced with a plain beige blouse, but her eyes still radiated defiance, at least for now. Justin Coleman entered calmly, carrying a modest black folder and a steel expression. His attorney, Sandra Valdez, walked beside him with the ease of someone who'd eaten bigger cases for breakfast. As they took their seats, Sandra whispered something that made Justin smirk ever so slightly. He didn't need revenge. He needed truth, exposed so brightly that even Karen's carefully constructed fantasy would wither under its heat. Judge Malcolm Brower, a no-nonsense man in his late 50s with a reputation for eviscerating frivolous litigation, entered and called the courtroom to order. Karen's attorney, a corporate-style man with slicked back hair and a voice like tepid oatmeal, began with a plea for understanding. "My client acted, Your Honor, in response to a dire environmental emergency. The state was under extreme drought alert. She believed, perhaps mistakenly, that Mr. Coleman's actions were in violation of community ethics, if not legal codes." Sandra stood, her tone sharper than a blade in ice. "So her defense is moral vigilantism. Your Honor, Ms. Strauss didn't just confront Mr. Coleman. She orchestrated a deliberate, unlawful intrusion onto private property, drained his legally sourced and licensed pool, and then claimed, on video, that the law didn't apply because she didn't like it. She submitted a USB drive and a stack of documents. The bailiff took them to the judge, who inserted the drive into his monitor. The courtroom dimmed slightly as the footage played. There it was, Karen scaling the fence, the pump draining the water, her triumphant, self-righteous monologue. No narration needed. The courtroom was silent except for the tinny echo of her own words. When the video ended, there was a pause. Karen's lawyer adjusted his tie, then called Karen to the stand. She entered the witness box with brittle dignity. "Ms. Strauss," the attorney began, "what motivated your decision to take action that day?" "I did what I had to," Karen replied, voice clipped. The entire neighborhood was suffering. People couldn't flush toilets twice in a row. Meanwhile, she gestured vaguely toward Justin, was swimming laps. It wasn't fair. Sandra rose smoothly. "Ms. Strauss, did you attempt any legal remedy before climbing onto Mr. Coleman's property?" There were discussions, community meetings, flyers. "Did you receive permission?" Karen hesitated. "It was an emergency." "Is that a no?" "Yes, but—" "No further questions, Your Honor." But Sandra wasn't done. She called Justin to the stand. He kept it simple. He described the licensing process for his well, how he'd installed filtration systems, how his water wasn't connected to city infrastructure, and how he had, in fact, considered offering water aid to neighbors until he was targeted, harassed, and violated. "It wasn't just the pool," he said. "It was the principle. I was willing to help. She made it war." The judge leaned forward, fingers steepled. "Mrs. Strauss, I'd like to hear, briefly, how you believed this was legal." Karen stood from her seat without being prompted, eyes glassy. "Because he made all of us feel powerless. He sat up there like a king, with his green lawn and clean water, and we," her voice cracked, "we begged him. I begged him, but he said no." Judge Brower raised brow. "So you punished him?" "I restored balance." A ripple of murmurs passed through the courtroom. The judge exhaled. "Ms. Strauss, this court finds you guilty of trespassing, property damage, and unlawful interference with a licensed utility system. You are ordered to pay Mr. Coleman $185,000 in damages and legal fees. Furthermore, the court recommends a formal injunction barring you from any contact with Mr. Coleman or his property." Karen blinked. The words hit her like a backhand. "No," she muttered. "No, this isn't over." She turned abruptly, storming out of the witness box. Her lawyer scrambled to stop her, but she shoved open the courtroom door, only to be immediately stopped by a bailiff and escorted back. The audience watched in stunned silence as the once indomitable HOA president was led away. Her composure cracked open, her authority in shambles. And Justin? He didn't smile. He just sat quietly, breathing out the tension of weeks, knowing full well this war was finally over. For now. The ruling sent a seismic shift through Hawthorne Heights, one that couldn't be ignored or quietly buried under HOA newsletters and clipped hedges. The moment Judge Brower's gavel fell, Karen Strauss's reign as suburban queen came to an unceremonious end. Within days, an emergency HOA meeting was called, this time without Karen at the podium. Attendance was the highest it had ever been, not because residents wanted to gloat, but because they realized, perhaps for the first time, that their silence had fueled a crusade they never truly endorsed. Karen formally resigned, though resigned was generous. It was more like a hastily typed email sent at 2 a.m., followed by her immediate removal from all administrative channels. Her name disappeared from the HOA website by morning. The new acting president, a mild-mannered history teacher named Todd, took one look at the HOA charter and admitted, on record, "Yeah, we've been overreaching. A lot." Meanwhile, Justin's world shifted from battleground to borderline celebrity. The once icy glares from neighbors walking their dogs turned into warm nods, thumbs-up gestures, and even the occasional awkward batch of homemade banana bread left at his gate. People who'd once joined the Water Justice Facebook group began messaging him privately, some to apologize, others to ask for advice on sustainability. One neighbor, a retired plumber named Carl, even offered to help Justin install a water recycling system just for the hell of it. But perhaps the biggest change came from the simple fact that people finally understood what Justin had been trying to do all along. He wasn't hoarding water out of malice. He wasn't flaunting his autonomy for attention. He had built a self-sufficient life through knowledge, effort, and legal channels, something the rest of them now envied more than resented. In a surprising twist, the county water board reached out, asking Justin if he'd be interested in consulting on a community-wide sustainability initiative. He agreed, on one condition: full transparency and voluntary participation. No HOA mandates, just real collaboration. As part of his reintroduction to the community, Justin hosted a small gathering in his now refilled pool area. This time, the water sparkled, not just with chlorine, but with quiet vindication. Lawn chairs were set up, ice-cold lemonade was served. And though he was never much of a party host, Justin stood in front of his neighbors and said, "If anyone wants to talk about real conservation, you know where I live. I'll even let you in through the front gate." And then, the final cherry on top, someone brought a cake. Frosted in blue, it depicted a cartoon Karen, complete with a speech bubble that read, "I am the water authority," being dunked into a pool by a very triumphant stick figure Justin. Justin blinked at the absurd little creation, chuckled, and muttered, "I'm keeping that corner of the cake." The party erupted in laughter, and for the first time since the start of the entire ordeal, the neighborhood felt like what it should have always been, a community, not a battleground. A few months later, summer mellowed into a gentler warmth. The hills around Justin's property, once brittle and sun-scorched, showed signs of cautious revival after an unseasonal stretch of rain. The air carried the faint scent of dry pine and distant barbecues, the quiet hum of a neighborhood finally at peace. From his porch, Justin watched as birds dipped into the small, rain-fed pond he had recently added beside his garden. A personal nod to both utility and beauty. Life had settled into something familiar but deeper, more grounded. His days were now filled with projects he had once shelved, refining his gray water system, expanding his vegetable beds, sketching out blueprints for a greenhouse. But what had changed the most wasn't his land, or even the legal clarity surrounding it. It was the tone of every knock on his door, every wave from a passing neighbor, every "Hey, Justin!" shouted across the fence. He was no longer the guy on the hill with the pool. He was someone they looked up to not just geographically, but with earned respect. Even the HOA had changed. Todd and the new leadership team rewrote a sizable portion of the bylaws, removing vague language and adding clauses that ensured no homeowner could be harassed or targeted without legitimate, verifiable cause. A new initiative, backed by Justin as consultant, launched workshops on sustainable living. The same community that once shamed him now hosted composting tutorials and rainwater collection demonstrations under his guidance. One evening, as the sun melted behind the ridge, Justin stood at the edge of his newly filled pool. The surface reflected the sky like glass, and for a moment he saw himself as he had been at the beginning of it all, independent, focused, and slightly worn. But now there was something more, a quiet pride, not the pride of winning a fight, but of having held the line without losing himself in the battle. He turned toward the house, about to go inside, when he noticed something at the gate, a small white envelope. Cautiously, he approached and opened it. Inside was a simple note, handwritten in neat, careful script. "I was wrong. I see that now. I'm sorry. K." No grand apology, no return to the past, just an acknowledgement, like the soft click of a door finally closed. Justin folded the note and tucked it into his pocket. He looked out at the view once more. Houses, trees, gardens slowly thriving again. His land was the same, but the world around it had shifted. And for the first time in a long time, everything felt exactly where it should be.